Hawthorn is a renowned fairy tree. It was said that a singular hawthorn growing on a hill was particularly beloved by fairies, and that fairies inhabited the tree. So there were many superstitions about cutting it down or doing it harm in any way. The Anglo-Saxon name for hawthorn is hagthorn, and this is the same derivation of the word we have for a witch, both of which actually mean a hedge. So a witch was a magic worker of the hedge, but the hawthorn was particularly renowned for hedging too, and this link may not be a coincidence. It would seem there was a connection between boundaries and magic, but a lone hawthorn tree was particularly magical, and it was said that if you were to fall asleep under a hawthorn tree, you may be stolen away into Faeryland, and you would have to stay there for 7 years. This was not a particular drawback for Thomas the Rhymer though, who fell asleep under a hawthorn tree on Eldon Hill, and was taken away by the Queen of Elfland and given particular gifts, such as the art of poetry and the tongue that could not lie. It was said that if you were taken away to Faeryland, then not only may you receive gifts there, but you may also receive wishes. For this reason, the hawthorn tree has long been associated with wishing, and it is known as the clotty tree, when long ribbons are tied to branches and a wish is left for the fairies to find. The hawthorn was said to be inhabited by fairies, and as I have said, to cut it down was bad luck. There is a particular story from the last century of the DeLorean factory trying to set up a factory in Ireland, and it was said that workers would not move a hawthorn tree that was on a site, and so that John DeLorean himself actually got out a bulldozer and cut down this tree. And many blame this act on why the DeLorean enterprise failed and why he didn't manage to sell his cars or become very rich. So 7 is a particularly fairy-like number, and it is the sign of the fairy star, which is a 7-pointed star. Now, when these people who apparently were stolen away into Faeryland for 7 years returned, many of them said they had gained a fairy ally, and it was this fairy ally who had taught them the art of potions and healings, and many a cunning person said that they had returned from Elfland after 7 years with the ability to make magic potions. They had also returned with the fairy sight, and the fairy sight allowed them to see the other beings, the fae, the brownies, and their spirit helpers. Alison Pearson treated the Bishop of St Andrews for palpitations and flux. Janet Weir of Edinburgh told in her trial in April 1670 she treated him with an ointment would help Janet rubbed into his and gave her a piece of tree, stomach, or a root of a herb, had spent 7 years to do what she should so desire, and had seen the good neighbours make their salves in pans over fires, using the herbs picked before sunrise, and prescribed a potion made of ginger, cloves, aniseed, and the second sight from the Faeries were granted to an old Somerset woman, and her trial went to the well one day for water when a moth brushed against her face, and she was given the pixie sight. Immediately she saw a little man who told her to come with him and to tend his wife. Stein Maltman learned his healing skills from the fairy folk, whom he saw quite often. Cut up pieces they gave him a large repertoire of cures and buried them. He rubbed some patients with elf-shot. Some he waved a drawn sword over. Some were frightened, saying that the naked iron would scare the malady away. He was given these gifts from the fairy folk, how he used methods to cure animals. Bessie Dunlop was given a green silk thread by her fairy helper to help women in childbirth. These gifts by diagnosed sickness. She had first acquired these skills by going to the well and raising a whirlwind, and in this whirlwind a fairy man. The vicar of Wallingham in Surrey had recorded a range of cures that had been taught to him by the fairy preparation according to her instructions by fairies. Janet Morrison, Bessie, told the court in a trial in 1662 that a treatment should guarantee a recovery, a skill she'd been taught by the skills and charms from the fairies. The hawthorn is a tree which is associated with love and healing the heart. And one spell is to take 7 hawthorn twigs, break them off, and whisper your sorrows to them. Then when you had whispered your sorrows to 7 twigs, to wrap them in a hawthorn leaf and to bury them under the tree. The hawthorn, of course, is associated with Beltane. It is said that on the 1st of May, young people would go out and pick the blossom to hang on their doors. However, today we may wonder how they did this, as the hawthorn rarely seems to be out at the beginning of May. Well, the truth is that in 1752, 13 days were added to the calendar, which means that the hawthorn now blossoms in the middle of May and not at the beginning as it once did. Many witches were said to have received second sight from their fairy allies after having spent 7 years in Faeryland. And it was perhaps this association of witchcraft with fairy allies and with the hawthorn tree that created the legend of the magical associations of the craft and with this hedgerow tree. In fact, it may not be a coincidence that this is referred to. It may in fact be some kind of initiation that took 7 years to teach, but however, an important part of it would have been working with the hawthorn tree and the fairy allies that inhabit it. Many witches claimed that they had the fairy sight, and in fact we have some recipes for how this was achieved. And there were potions that you could apply on your face and on your eyes to give you the sight. So one record we have is of Elspeth Rioch, who lived in Scotland. And it was said that to gain the fairy sight she would boil an egg on 3 consecutive Sundays. And when she had done this, she said she would take the sweat off the egg and rub it on her hands and rub it onto her eyes, and this would give her the fairy sight. Another recipe, what was told, was to take a flower that was called millefleur and to say the name of the Holy Trinity over this flower, and then use this to rub on the eyes again to create the fairy sight. However, the fairies were said to have cursed a few people who had seen them and who had stolen magic potions for the fairy sight, and had been very angered at this and had blinded the particular people involved. So it was never an easy thing to work with the fae, and you must always be cautious that you are not offending them or making them angry or stealing gifts from them. Being taught by the fairies then would seem to be an important part of traditional witchcraft, and sitting underneath a hawthorn tree seemed to be the way to meet the fae and be taken into Faeryland. Whether you would want to sleep under a tree or whether just sit under it and meditate for a while, it has always been known as a place where fairies inhabited. And what better way to meet them than to come out and work with the hagthorn tree, or the hawthorn, or the fairy tree.